The rain had started just as Emma stepped out of the small Italian restaurant. Her coat pulled tight against the chilly Seattle wind. It was supposed to be her anniversary dinner. She had booked the table, chosen her favorite wine, even worn the soft blue dress Mark once said made her look like a calm ocean. But he wasn't there. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Sorry, caught up at work. Big meeting tomorrow. Can we do dinner this weekend?" She read it twice before locking the screen and staring out at the empty street. A quiet disappointment settled in her chest, familiar, dull, and heavy. Emma had stopped expecting grand gestures from her husband long ago. Mark wasn't unkind or cruel. He was just absent. His mind lived in his projects, meetings, and deadlines. Their home, once full of laughter and little surprises, had turned into a routine of polite conversations and shared silences. She wrapped her arms tighter and started walking toward the main road, hoping to catch a cab. Her heels clicked on the wet pavement, each step echoing the loneliness she didn't want to admit she felt. Then a voice called out behind her, "Emma, honey, a ride?" She turned and saw Ryan, Mark's younger brother, standing beside his gray pickup truck. The sight of him made her blink in surprise. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" He smiled. "Had dinner with a friend nearby." "You look stranded. Mark couldn't make it," she said. Her voice calm, though it trembled slightly. Ryan tilted his head, his expression softening. "Hop in. You shouldn't be out here alone in this weather." For a moment, she hesitated. Ryan had always been easygoing, charming in a quiet way, but she hadn't really spent time with him in years. Still, the rain was falling harder now, and she didn't want to argue with kindness. "Okay," she said, opening the passenger door. The inside of his truck smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. Ryan turned the heater on and glanced at her with a small smile. "Seat warmer's broken, but I promise the ride's safe." She laughed, the sound lighter than she expected. "Good to know." As they pulled onto the highway, the city lights blurred against the rain-streaked windshield. The soft hum of the engine filled the space between them. Emma stared out the window, watching the glowing reflections slide across the wet road. "You look tired," Ryan said after a while, his voice gentle. "Long day," she replied. "And it was supposed to be our anniversary dinner." "Oh," he said softly. He forgot. Not forgot. Just postponed. Work as usual. Ryan didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "He does that a lot, doesn't he?" Emma sighed. "He means well. He just loses track of everything else." Ryan nodded, his hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "I know how he gets. Always chasing the next thing. You deserve better than canceled dinners." She turned to look at him, surprised by his honesty. "You shouldn't say that." "He's your brother. Not saying he's a bad person," Ryan said. "I'm saying he forgets the good things he already has." The words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't respond, only looked back out at the rain. But somewhere deep inside, something stirred, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in a long time, to be seen, to be understood. Ryan stopped at a red light, and for a moment the soft glow from the street lamps fell across his face. He looked older than she remembered, a faint tiredness beneath his eyes, but still that same calm warmth in his expression. He glanced at her. "You still paint?" She blinked, startled that he remembered. "A little. Not much lately." "You should. You were good at it." Emma smiled faintly. "You're the first person who's said that in years." The light turned green. They drove on, neither speaking, for several minutes. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of quiet that understands you. When they reached her neighborhood, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Ryan pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine. The sudden stillness made her heart beat louder than it should have. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, but didn't move to unlock the doors right away. "Can I say something?" She looked at him, hesitant, but curious. "I know it's not my place," said slowly, "but you don't have to pretend everything's fine when it's not." Her throat tightened. "What makes you think I'm pretending?" He gave a small, sad smile. Because you look like someone who keeps choosing to be strong when she shouldn't have to." For a moment, she couldn't find any words. His voice was calm, not intrusive, but it reached into the quiet part of her heart she'd been ignoring for years. "Ryan," she began, but the words trailed off. He looked away first, as if realizing he'd said too much. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "No," she interrupted softly. "It's okay." The rain tapped lightly against the roof again. Emma stared at the raindrops on the windshield, each one gliding down slowly until it disappeared. It was strange, she thought, how one small moment could make her feel more seen than years of marriage had. "Good night, Ryan," she whispered, finally reaching for the door handle. "Good night, Emma," he said quietly. She stepped out, pulling her coat around her, and walked to the door. The sound of his truck backing out faded down the street, leaving behind a silence that felt too loud. Inside, Mark was home after all, sitting in his office with his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up briefly when she entered. "Hey, you're back early?" "Sorry, it's been a crazy night." Emma smiled faintly. "It's okay. I got a ride." He nodded, barely listening, already returning to his conversation. She climbed the stairs, her shoes echoing softly against the floor. In the bedroom, she changed into her nightclothes and sat on the edge of the bed from below. She could still hear Mark's voice, calm, confident, steady, the same voice she had once fallen in love with. But tonight, it sounded distant, like it belonged to another world as she lay down. Her mind replayed the drive, the warmth in Ryan's voice, the concern in his eyes, the words he had said. "You don't have to pretend everything's fine." Emma turned off the lamp, letting the darkness settle around her. She told herself it was just a kind gesture, nothing more, that Ryan had simply been being thoughtful. But as sleep slowly crept in, she realized it wasn't his words that stayed with her. It was how he had looked at her. Not with pity, not with obligation, but with genuine care that had been a long time since anyone had looked at her that way. That night, for the first time in years, Emma dreamed of something she couldn't quite name, something between sadness and hope. And when she woke the next morning, sunlight spilling across her pillow, she found herself wondering not about the anniversary dinner that never happened, but about the man who had offered her a ride on a rainy night and made her remember what it felt like to be noticed. Days passed after that rainy night, but Ryan's words still lingered in Emma's mind. Every time she replayed that car ride in her head, she felt a strange mix of warmth and guilt. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was simply kindness, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Mark continued to bury himself in work. He was traveling more often, calling less, and when he was home, his attention was always elsewhere. They spoke like old friends who didn't know what to talk about anymore. Emma didn't resent him. She had simply stopped expecting him to notice her moods, her silences, or the way she had started painting again in the quiet hours of the night. One afternoon, she was coming out of the grocery store when she heard a horn honk softly behind her. Turning, she saw Ryan's gray pickup again. He leaned out the window and smiled. "Need a ride?" For a second, she froze, memories of the last ride flashing through her mind. But his smile was so casual, so warm, that she couldn't say no. "Sure," she said with a small nod, climbing in. The moment she sat down, that same sense of comfort washed over her. The radio played softly in the background, an old song she used to love. Ryan tapped the steering wheel to the beat, his tone light. "You've been okay?" "I've been good," she lied. He didn't press. He just nodded. But when they reached a red light, he glanced at her again and said, "You don't have to pretend." "Emma, I know when something's wrong." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "You always say that like you can read minds." "No," he said. "I just pay attention." That simple line hit her harder than it should have. It had been years since anyone had said something like that to her, something that made her feel visible. She turned away, pretending to focus on the rain streaking down the window. When they reached her neighborhood, she noticed he didn't turn down her street right away. "Want to take the long way?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." They drove around the lake where the water shimmered under the gray sky. The air was calm, filled only with the sound of the rain and the faint hum of the tires. Ryan began talking about his job, how he was trying to start a small carpentry business, how people said he reminded them of his father, and how that both scared and motivated him. "I'm tired of being the one people overlook," he admitted. "Mark got the brains, the career, the house, the wife. I got the leftover expectations." Emma looked at him, startled by the honesty. "You make it sound like you're competing with him." He laughed lightly. "Maybe I was, when I was younger. But not anymore. Now I just want peace." There was something in his tone that felt deeper than words. Emma found herself saying, "You're not in his shadow, Ryan. You've just been walking your own path quietly." He looked at her, his expression softening. "You always see the best in people, don't you?" "Not always," she said. "Just when I care." The moment hung between them, quiet but heavy. He didn't respond, and she didn't push further. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things they both understood but couldn't name by the time they reached her house. The rain had stopped. Ryan parked in the same spot as before and turned to her. "You know," he said, "you shouldn't spend so much time alone. You've got too much light for that." She smiled weakly. "Maybe that's just what happens when people stop seeing it." He held her gaze for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "Then they're fools for not noticing." Emma didn't know what to say. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she gave a small nod, opened the door, and stepped out. "Emma," he said suddenly. She turned back. "If you ever need to talk, you know I'm around, right?" "I know," she said softly, then walked to her door without looking back. That night, she sat in her studio, a small converted corner of the living room, and picked up a paintbrush for the first time in months. She painted what she felt but couldn't say. When she stepped back, she saw two figures standing apart under a gray sky, the space between them filled with color, not distance, but something fragile and unnamed. The next morning, she got a message. "Coffee later." It was from Ryan. She hesitated, then replied, "Sure, 1 hour." They met at a quiet cafe near the waterfront. The rain had cleared and the afternoon light poured through the windows. Ryan looked relaxed, his hair a little messy, his jacket unzipped. "I didn't know you liked this place," she said. "I didn't," he replied. Until now. They talked for hours about simple things, random memories, and the strange way life seemed to repeat lessons until you finally learned them. Emma found herself laughing, something she hadn't done freely in a long time. Ryan had that effect. He made everything feel lighter, even when they talked about heavy things. At one point he said, "Do you ever wish life came with a reset button?" She smiled. "Sometimes, but then we'd lose everything that taught us who we are." He looked at her thoughtfully. "That's a very Emma thing to say." "And what's that supposed to mean?" she asked, amused. "That you see the beauty in things, even when they're falling apart." Her laughter faded. "Maybe I just don't want to admit when things are broken." "Maybe," he said softly, "you just need someone to remind you they're worth fixing." Their eyes met across the table. For a long moment, neither looked away. Then the waitress appeared with their check. Breaking the spell, when they walked out, the air smelled like wet pavement and coffee. Ryan walked her to her car, and before she could say goodbye, he said quietly, "I don't know what's happening here, but I don't want to make things harder for you." Her heart tightened. "You're not." He looked like he didn't believe her. "Still," he said, "I think I should keep some distance, for both our sakes." She nodded, understanding but wishing he hadn't said it. "You're probably right." He smiled sadly. "I usually am, but I hate being right about this." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look in Ryan's eyes, that mix of care, conflict, and restraint. It wasn't about wanting him. It was about what he represented, the attention, the understanding. The quiet warmth she missed in her marriage the next day. She tried to focus on her routine cleaning, painting, cooking, but everything felt off. The house felt too big, too silent. She kept catching herself glancing at her phone, hoping for a message that never came. When Mark came home that evening, he was cheerful, talking about a new client and future plans. He didn't notice how distracted she looked. Over dinner, he mentioned Ryan's been busy with his new workshop. Haven't seen him in a week. Emma froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Oh, that's good. Yeah, Mark continued, unaware of her tension. He finally seems focused. Guess he's growing up. She smiled politely, but her heart ached with confusion. She wanted to believe distance was the right thing, but it felt like losing something she hadn't even realized she needed later. As she sat by the window watching the lights flicker outside, she wondered why a single person could stir so many emotions, she thought. She'd buried long ago. Ryan hadn't crossed any lines. Neither had she. But somehow their hearts had stepped into a quiet, forbidden space. One built not on betrayal, but on connection. And that, she realized, could be just as dangerous. The morning light spilled through the curtains, soft but unwelcome. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her untouched coffee growing cold. It had been a week since she'd last seen Ryan. A week since that quiet conversation outside, the cafe when they agreed to keep their distance. Yet, the silence that followed felt louder than any words they'd exchanged. She didn't regret meeting him, not for a second. What she regretted was how much his presence had reminded her of what she was missing in her own life. The laughter, the gentle concern, the feeling of being noticed. Mark still loved her in his own way. She believed that. But his love had become distant, practical, something that fit neatly into his schedule. That evening, Mark came home early, a rare surprise. He set down his briefcase and smiled tiredly. How about dinner out tonight? Just the two of us. Emma looked up in surprise. Really? Yeah, he said, rubbing his neck. I know I've been. Somewhere else lately? I just think we could use some time. His tone was sincere, and for the first time in months, she saw a glimpse of the man she'd married. Warm, attentive, trying. She agreed, and for a while, the evening went well. They talked about small things. A neighbor's new dog, a movie they wanted to watch, plans for summer. But even as she smiled, a quiet ache followed her. She was here with her husband, yet part of her still felt like she was standing in that truck on a rainy night. Hearing Ryan's voice saying, "You don't have to pretend everything's fine," after dinner. They drove home in comfortable silence. But when they reached the driveway, Mark's phone buzzed again. He frowned. Sorry, it's work. I'll just take this inside. Emma sat there for a moment, watching him step into the house, phone pressed to his ear, voice fading into the distance. The night around her felt still, almost expectant. She shook her head and went inside over the next few days. Mark's brief attempt to reconnect faded back into the same old routine. He was gone before she woke up, home after she was asleep. The emptiness of the house grew heavier, and Emma threw herself into painting again. It became her escape, the only space where she could feel free without guilt. One evening, she was washing brushes, her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her breath catch Ryan. For a few seconds, she just stared at it. Then, against her better judgment, she answered. Hey, his voice came, calm but uncertain. Sorry if I'm calling out of the blue. It's okay, she said softly. How have you been? Busy, he replied, trying to stay out of trouble. There was a pause before he added, I heard Mark's been traveling again. Yes, she said. He's in Portland for a few days. Silence. Then Ryan asked, You doing okay? The question, so simple yet so genuine, cracked something inside her. Some days, she admitted. Same here, he said. Listen, I have something to drop off. I found an old book of yours from college. Thought you might want it back. She hesitated. You can just leave it on the porch. He chuckled softly. You know, I won't do that. An hour later, his truck pulled into the driveway. When she opened the door, the sight of him made her heart flutter, not because of attraction, but because of familiarity. The kind of warmth she had been missing for too long. He handed her the book, a worn novel with faded pages. I found it when I was cleaning my mom's old attic. Figured you'd want it." "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with everything they hadn't said over the past weeks. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "You look tired." She smiled faintly. "I think I just forgot what it feels like to rest." He nodded, his gaze gentle. "You should take care of yourself, Emma." "I'm trying," she said. "But it's hard to fix something when you're the only one holding it together." Ryan's expression softened with quiet sadness. "You don't have to fix everything alone." Something inside her wanted to believe that, but she knew she couldn't lean on him. It wasn't fair, not to him, not to Mark, and not to herself. "Ryan," she said quietly, "we can't keep doing this." He nodded slowly, his eyes heavy. "I know. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I will be," she said, though her voice trembled. Eventually, he took a slow step back. "You deserve to be happy, Emma, whatever that means." She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "So do you." He gave a small nod, then turned to leave. As he walked down the path toward his truck, the streetlights cast long shadows that seemed to stretch between them. She wanted to call out, to say something that would make sense of what they were, but the words never came. That night, Emma stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't sure what she was mourning, the connection she couldn't have, or the marriage she was afraid to lose. All she knew was that something had to change. The next morning, she sat across from Mark at breakfast. He was reading his emails, half listening as usual. Emma put down her coffee cup and said quietly, "Mark, can we talk?" He glanced up. "Sure, what's wrong?" "I'm lonely," she said simply. The honesty startled even her. Mark blinked, lowering his phone. "Lonely? I'm right here, Em." "No," she said. "You're around, but you're not here." "I can't remember the last time we had a real conversation." He frowned. "Is this about my work again?" "It's about us," she replied. "About how we stopped being a team. About how I feel like I'm living beside you, not with you." Mark leaned back, silent for a long moment. "I didn't realize you felt that way." "I didn't either," she said softly. "Not until recently." Something shifted in his expression, guilt, maybe, or understanding. "I know I've been distant," he admitted. "I thought I was doing it for us, to build something stable." "Appreciate that," she said. "But what's the point of building a life if we're not in it together?" The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Then, for the first time in months, Mark reached across the table and took her hand. "You're right," he said. "I don't want to lose you." Tears welled in her eyes, and she squeezed his hand back. "Then let's try. Not for the sake of pretending, but for real." From that day on, small changes began. Mark started coming home earlier. They cooked dinner together, went for evening walks, laughed again. It wasn't perfect. Healing never is, but it was real. As for Ryan, he kept his distance just as he said he would. A few weeks later, they saw each other at a family gathering. When their eyes met, there was a quiet understanding there, not regret. Not longing, just gratitude. Later that night, as Emma and Mark drove home, she looked out the window at the soft glow of the city lights. The ache in her chest had faded, replaced by something steadier. Peace. She realized she hadn't fallen in love with Ryan. She had simply remembered what love was supposed to feel like, alive, kind, and seen. Sometimes, she thought, people come into our lives not to stay, but to wake us up. Ryan had been that for her, a reminder that she still had the capacity to feel deeply, and that her marriage still had the chance to be rebuilt if both hearts were willing. When she got home, she placed the old book Ryan had given her on the shelf beside her favorite paintings. It wasn't a symbol of what could have been, but of what she had learned. That true love isn't about perfect timing or constant passion. It's about choosing again and again to be present, to listen. To see each other as she turned off the lights and leaned against Mark's shoulder, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes the right person comes at the wrong time just to remind you to hold on to what's right." And for the first time in years, Emma felt truly at peace.